The first panel is entitled Looking Back, Looking Forward. The SNF Conference emerged in 2012 in the midst of another major disruption, the 2008 global financial crisis. So we have invited back some of our most provocative presenters to explore how ideas they have shared at past SNF conferences about critical issues speak to the present moment and our possible futures. The moderator of the panel is Alan Stoga, chairman of the Dolberg Foundation. Alan, over to you.
Thank you, Anna Kynthia. As you just heard, I am chairman of the Dolberg Foundation and deeply grateful to the Stavros Niarchos Foundation for the support we've received to explore many different kinds of issues over the last several years. That said, I'm going to start with a correction. I think we should change the title of this panel a little bit. We look back in order to look forward. The fact is that the SNF conferences of the past 8 years have been amazingly prescient, both in the selection of topics, as Andreas just shared, but also in the selection of participants and, frankly, of audiences. If you had listened carefully to each and every panel over these years, almost nothing that has happened during this extraordinary, and I must say extraordinarily weird year would have surprised you. So this panel is designed, as you heard, not just to demonstrate that it was prescient, but to start asking the next question. Can our societies cope with the buildup of enormous health, political, social, and economic pressure without exploding? Who must do what to turn darkness into light? How do we recalibrate our moral compasses in a world where true north seems to have disappeared? And we're going to do all that in about an hour. The game plan is simple. I will introduce each of my colleagues with a clip of comments they made at an earlier SNF conference, and I will ask each of them to talk a bit about how what they said then applies now. While they're talking, and whatever you want, you're invited to send questions, and we'll try to answer as many of them as possible during the latter part of this program. So let's start with Ruth Fadden, who is the founder of the Johns Hopkins Berman Institute of Bioethics and its inaugural Andreas C. Dracopoulos director. Her video from 2017, please.
Beyond?
No, over to the video, please.
Beyond.
So the thinking or the concept here is that as groups, and this really is a group phenomenon, as groups who have experienced exploitation, domination, exclusion over time, begin to sort of, they've had enough, right? And it boils over, and they begin as a group, the group begins to demand recognition and equal moral status in the political arena and in the cultural arena. At some level, and it's human nature, the groups that have had the more powerful and privileged positions begin to experience a certain level of threat. It's threatening, it's disruptive of the order. And there's and you know, sociologists and others who have studied this phenomenon recognize that what happens is a longing for the good old days, right? When society was calm and quiet, and there wasn't polarization, and life was good. And translation, they long for the days in which there was no plurality. There was no disagreement because the conversation was controlled, the values were controlled, the rights, the power, and the opportunities were controlled among a restricted group, right? When the groups that have been excluded start to emerge and express their right to be treated equally and to have their fair share of opportunities and power, this dynamic emerges. Society is polarized, but in fact, from a long view of moral progress, as you point out, Stavros, at the end, it's painful, it's difficult, it's dislocating, there's anger, there's warring camps, there are echo chambers, there are lots of things going on that are not good, but maybe that's an inevitable process, right? Maybe there's no way to get to the point where things are more fair and people are treated more respectfully than through this dislocating experience. So we have to be mindful that polarization, if that's the term we're giving for societal dislocation, is not always a bad thing. It can be a period of disruption that takes us indeed to a better place, and we can fill this.
Thank you. That was the old Ruth. This is the new Ruth. Ruth, let me ask the inverse of the question that most people are asking these days. What didn't surprise you about the last couple of months? Why weren't you surprised when this pandemic swept across the globe and knocked us all off our centers?
When you asked me that initially, I said nothing surprised me, or basically nothing surprised me. And I think the clip that was just played sort of foreshadows why. I'm going to make 3 quick points, Alan, and then maybe discussion, talk more constructively about where we can go, hopefully globally from here, or where the world can go. So first point is that this moment has laid bare the profoundly unjust inequalities that are deeply rooted in the basic structures of societies generally. Inequalities in health and economic security and in power and privilege. Everywhere. It is people of advantage who are suffering the least in this pandemic, and it is people from disadvantaged groups who are suffering the most. That there would be this differential impact, this extraordinarily wide differential impact, was tragically totally predictable. My second point is that the pandemic has not only exposed these structural injustices, it has exacerbated them. The pandemic has made the gap between privileged and advantaged worse, not only during the pandemic, but likely for decades to come. 2020 is on schedule to wipe out all the gains in global poverty reduction made in the past 30 years. According to some estimates, as many as 500 million people, 500 million people plus, will be thrust into poverty because of the pandemic. Now, my third point connects to racial justice and racial injustice primarily. Racial injustice is a particularly pernicious form of structural injustice, especially when it is perpetuated by the power of police brutality. The American racial reckoning and the pandemic happening at the same time is not some cosmic coincidence. The injustices laid bare by the pandemic and by the murder of George Floyd and others have the same root causes. And as I said in that clip, people at the bottom are appearing to finally have had enough. They've had enough. And this is not just a US phenomenon. Demonstrations have occurred in at least 20 countries, other than the US, on 3 continents. And in some countries, like Mexico, Brazil, and Australia, the outrage is directed at local racial injustices in the pandemic. So this conjoined moment, right, is far from solely an American phenomenon. And I sort of stand by where I was in 2017 or whatever that clip is from. And that is, I think if we look at this, perhaps a little optimistically, but with that long view of moral progress, it's possible, maybe, that the pandemic will hasten some of the inevitable disruptive processes that could lead to a better world.
Thanks. I'm a hopeful pessimist, so I hope you're right. Let's switch now to Eric Klinenberg, who is the Helen Gould Shepard Professor in the Social Sciences at New York University. In 2018, Eric spoke at the Conference on Disruption. The video, please.
We're living in this profoundly important moment. I mean, we are at this moment at a kind of switching point, potentially of world historic significance. We really don't know which way we will go, and we could see all kinds of directions. And it concerns me that we don't have a kind of committed institutional project to shoring up a democratic process when it comes to infrastructure building and society making. Because I think that where this story goes is going to hinge a lot on who's in the room to have that conversation.
Absolutely. So, David.
I could just kind of add a little bit, because I think you can map the failures in the 20th century of the kind of mismatching of infrastructure and city making. And it's, it creates incredible apartheid cities along class lines and along racial lines. And I don't say that lightly, I mean it. It's literally, whether it's Moses in New York or it's the planners in Johannesburg, infrastructure can be used as a device which can operate class operations or racial operations, because it's not done in a democratic way. It's done as an action of need in the city, so it overrides the idea that somehow it should be a participatory kind of idea about our aspiration.
In 2 seconds, I just want to point out two quick dangers here, which is the threat of the delegation of authority to the private sector as we remove resources from government, and then the threat of anti-democratic regimes running nation states. In both cases, we lose any capacity for that process, and I think those are things we should look out for.
Thank you. We've solved at least one of those problems. We've given governments trillions and trillions and trillions of dollars to play with this year. Eric, you any more confident than you were a year ago that will be allocated through a democratic process in ways which will, in fact, reinforce our democratic experiments around the world?
Alan, if I were, I would really question your judgment for putting me on this panel. One could hardly imagine a more dangerous moment to have authoritarian or anti-democratic leaders, because as you just mentioned, we are now spending more public money than ever before in history to deal with the overlapping crises that Ruth just laid out for us, the health crisis, the economic crisis, the social crisis. And so, what I'm struck by listening to myself a couple of years ago is how upbeat I sounded then compared to where I am now. That was a conversation about social infrastructure and democratic institutions and how we go about rebuilding society. We obviously know what happened in the last couple of years in the US, in the UK, in Brazil, in many other nations that took the authoritarian turn and not the democratic turn. And clearly those nations are paying a massive price for that right now, in terms of lives lost, in terms of people getting sick, in terms of opportunities squandered, and in terms of the long-term economic damage. I mean, we're talking about catastrophic outcomes that are related to the absence of democracy. We're also talking about infrastructure, and I want to point this out because while the rates of COVID-19 incidents and mortality have started to go down in Europe, they are really just beginning to hit parts of the world where most people don't have access to the kind of infrastructure that the affluent world takes for granted. So what happens when this novel coronavirus hits the shanty towns, the favelas, the slums of Africa, of Latin America, of India, of places where the first thing you need to do to stay safe, wash your hands often, is nearly impossible because there's no access to running water. So, I remain very concerned about our failure to invest in each other, our failure to invest in systems that make life better for everyone. The book I wrote is called Palaces for the People, and we surely see a lot of palaces going up in the world these days. We just don't see a lot of palaces that ordinary people can use, things like libraries and parks and social infrastructure like that. And so I think I stand by one thing I said. We are at a critical juncture. We are at a crossroads. And in the next several months, here in my country, in the United States, we will be making decisions that will certainly determine the future of our democratic experiment, and that unfortunately I think will determine the well-being in many other parts of the world as well. So I have never lived in a moment where so many things are up for grabs and where it's so hard to know what comes next.
Thank you, Eric. Next, Bill T. Jones, a choreographer and a dancer, is the co-founder of the Bill T. Jones Arnie Zane Company and the founding artistic director of New York Live Arts. Bill's remarks that you will see in a second were made at last year's conference. The video, please.
Let me see, I just had a moment of inspiration while listening to the last, and I want to read you something. And it will be a favorite poem of mine by Frank O'Hara, some call it the beat poet. And it is, let us do something grand just this once. Something small and important and un-American. Some fine thing will resemble a human hand and really be merely a thing, not needing a military band nor an elegant forthcoming to tease spotlights or a hand from the public's thinking, but be, in a defiant land of its own, a real right thing. A real right thing. So I'm very much with my colleague here. I usually, in situations like this, when the atmosphere is so incredibly thoughtful and intellectual, I feel the animal of the performer in me. And that's the only response I can really give to some of the questions that we're dealing with. In my experience, many performers and makers are extremely self-involved. It seems to be part of the job description. We're not saints. Most of us are not scientists. And we are battling demons. Some of them are self-generated, some of them are historical. But we have to find a way to get out there, like literally, my body changes when I'm on this stage with you all out there. There's a chemical change. Now, how does that save this fucking world? And there's the rub. And I hope to find out something here today, because I've almost given up the idea that what I do can do anything more than create these little eddies of meaning, little eddies of authenticity. And the authenticity will encourage the young. Will it attract the dollars? That seems to be part of the formula. So I have a theater which is called New York Live Arts. We got rid of, we don't call it dance. What people do there is embodied investigation. Reading this very peculiar book that we were assigned to read, Mr. Guy Debord's treatise on, I believe, socialism, and he's condemning constantly this spectacle that the society has become. Now I understand why I, as a young artist, was constantly angry and protesting. And now how I see so many young artists right now who have no market share. There's no value on what they do. And I thought for some time that they were being very, I call them refugees from the middle classes. That they really were indulging in something that really nobody cared. And that they were indulging in something that had no value. But you know, now I think that that posture of outsiderness is what we're talking about today.
Thank you. Bill, we talked about this the other day. The preamble to the American Constitution, which was signed in 1780s.
Hold on. I don't want any questions. I don't want to do that.
Okay, what would you like to do?
We have gotten this far in the conversation, and race has never been named. We have never used the word white supremacy. We have used other polite words. Ruth and Eric, my hat's off to you. You're the people I want on my side of the barricade. And there is a war going on now. So let's cut the bullshit. What I know we're supposed to be talking about global issues. The pandemic has, as Carrie Mae Wim said, Carrie Mae Weems, a Black photographer of great power, has said that the COVID ripped a scab off of something. It ripped the scab off of this culture. And we have seen the divisions. One of those things, and I think the language is very well chosen, Ruth, very well chosen, Eric, but one of those things that we have to talk about, even look at this panel, look at the whole conference. What is white supremacy? Yeah, we talk of polarization. What do you mean, Andreas, about polarization? Polarization implies there are two equals, here and here. But if you have had this historic inequality that goes right down to the levels of what people are saying to each other across boardroom tables, in bedrooms, police violence, all those things point to something that is bigger. Now, I know we're trying to be global in this discussion. And right now, but I do think there's something good or bad about the American situation that has led these discussions over the years. And right now, it has a face. And the face is that of George Floyd. And the face is that of young people of many races coming together, young people of many races coming together and talking about race. I assumed it was so much, excuse the terminology, so much liberal guilt and bullshit. I assumed it was a 24-hour news cycle. I assumed it was a fashion. But now I'm looking at these statues that are coming down. I'm looking at what happened in Trump's rally the other day. I'm looking at the language, the hyper-heated language of partisanism. And I'm wondering, is this a revolutionary moment? Let's call it. Is this a revolutionary moment? I am a middle-class guy. I own property. I don't want anarchy. I'm scared. But the youth are not doing that. That's why I have to step back. Who are the voices that are going to be here next year? And I think that next year's festival, Andreas, should be intersectionality. Because the young are trying to think on a lot of different ways at one time. How does racism, how does white supremacy, how does inequality, how does the the control that men have over the bodies of women, how does that all fit into the question about what the future is going to be? And you're right, somebody said, who's around the table? That's a big question. And that's something we discussed last year at the conference as well, didn't we, Andreas? About who is around the table. So that's my comment. I'm not quite sure what I said last year that put me, that I could even inhabit the stage with a person like Ruth and Eric or Andreas. I am not a policy expert. I am an artist doing what I'm doing right now. It's coming from emotion and coming from a sense of outrage. I want to sing, make poetry. I'm not the one you should be putting into Congress. I'm not the one. But there's something about those persons that are missing in our discussion. Thank you for indulging me.
You are welcome for the indulgence. Andreas, you're next.
Thank you very much. Don't do that ever to a black man again. I'm telling you, that moment.
This is a conversation.
Don't do that. It was patronizing. Bill, if you want to, do not do it.
Bill, and it's patronizing to your colleagues.
Do not do it.
Is there any chance you're going to let someone else speak?
Let's move on.
Is that okay? I'm trying to move on. Andreas,
yes,
you're next.
I just want you to check your language and check your privilege. This is what it looks like.
Bill, I would like you to check your language and your privilege. And we can either move on with this.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Don't wag your finger at me, Bill. Can we move on,
and
or
don't
do
take
you
the
insist
white
on the
man's
stage?
position with me, sir.
Guys, come on, Bill, please. Come
Andreas, I was going to introduce you as a day trader from New York, but we'll just move on from that. Instead, let's see your video, and that you, in 2012, when you started this, what you had in mind. The video, please.
To openly discuss the role of philanthropy, especially during times of social crisis, like the one tormenting Greece for the last few years. In a recent Bloomberg article, Anders Asland, a senior fellow at the Peterson Institute of International Economics in DC, while describing the recent successes of the Swedish economy, he mentions the need of a social welfare society instead of a social welfare state. In the last decades around the world, even before the challenges became so interrelated and more complex to solve, the state on its own, as well as the private sector on its own, have both proven, for various reasons, unable to provide the necessary environment for our societies to survive and excel. So there comes the need for a social welfare society, a fair, dynamic, and viable society where all members from all sectors, including public, private, etc., have to contribute towards creating a healthy society able to defend itself against today's many and complex challenges, able to provide for its citizens the basic needs for life itself, to provide for decency, dignity, civility, and last but not least, opportunity to dream and to make dreams become reality, opportunity for a better tomorrow. All positive forces have to collaborate towards this end. One of the most constructive ways to be in need of real help is through philanthropy at large. Philanthropy can be expressed in many ways, financial support being an effective one, but not the only one. Volunteerism is another one. Philanthropy is one of the few remaining issues nowadays that should not, and thankfully does not, polarize people. Philanthropy has an opportunity, if not an obligation, to link in a way and bring together all the positive forces from all of life's sectors, and in doing so, help move towards an effective, efficient, dynamic, viable social welfare society, where all of its members can survive in dignity and indeed prosper. We need to sustain the basic pillars of society and democracy at large to ensure that we will have a basic structure, which to eventually restructure. We cannot let everyone get degraded and then expect things to automatically improve. In times of crisis like the one Greece is having now, where basic needs are so clearly missing, philanthropy's role is challenging, yet quite clear, and at the same time fulfilling, in as much as playing a part in being able to alleviate vital socioeconomic pressures.
Andreas, why is all this important to you? This is a year where the UN canceled, the environmental meetings canceled, everything's canceled. Why did you decide that you had to go ahead, even in this truncated form?
I think the main thing is, and Bill, we hear you, and I'll say more about that, but we do hear you. And I think the thing is, I don't think we have any of the answers, and we're not looking to get the answers. I think I do believe a lot, and I think the more time goes by, the more the need is there for it, to find safe, I call it safe, I don't want to be misunderstood, but a safe space where we can all get together and discuss. As they say, to solve a problem, first of all, you have to realize you have it. So I think we're there, we know we have it. The second part is, we need to talk about it. And what I meant when I said, Bill, and I've been saying it for a long time, it's been getting worse and worse, polarization means that, in my mind, that we can't even start having a discussion about it. And I can understand why. But I'm trying to say we need to find a safe space where we can feel comfortable to bring it on the table and talk about it. We'll never get to a solution, in my view. We'll never get to a solution if we don't all get together at the table. We need to discuss. We need to realize we know we have a problem. And as you said, that's a very important point. It's the young generation that is going to take us out of the situation, all of us. And we need to empower the young generation to really get more and more involved in everything, starting from voting, starting from getting involved in making decisions, which is our responsibility to engage them into being part of the decisions for their own future, and also to show us the way. It doesn't mean that that we as older generations, we don't have things to offer, but I think it's very important that we get a fresh look and the young get even more engaged. So the polarization part for me, I find it's a shame that sometimes you start a sentence about any issue, and within 5 seconds, we're going to be labeled. Everybody is going to be labeled. And I think this is this is catastrophe, because we'll never get anywhere. We need to get together. I think nobody is perfect. We need to get together and try to find, at least start asking the questions, and then try to slowly but steadily. Again, we know the good news is there's no good news here, but the thing is that we know we have the problem and we have to deal with it. And the young will lead the way, and I really believe that. And we have to give them space, and we have to help them do that. Okay, which is it's a big burden for them. So we have to help them, because I think we are, the older generation, we are tainted by life itself. So we need, and I thank you for joining us. And I think we need, and you are right, we need to improve a lot of things. But as I always say, even to my kids, as long as the intent is good, even if you make mistakes, keep trying, and give it all you have. So the intent is to try to get together, talk about it, and even if we agree to disagree on some things, I think it would help, because it's missing. And to Eric's point about the palace for the people, that's why we were so proud. And I'm not trying to say how good we are, but we were really proud that our biggest grant, which was the SNFCC, was truly given to the people, to be enjoyed by the people. And it's amazing how it was embraced by the people. And this project has been a huge success, because it was really embraced by the people who realized that this is really theirs and it's for them to enjoy. So I'm an optimist by nature. I realize we have huge problems, but I believe we can fix them.
So Bill said that it may be a revolutionary moment. Usually that's known ex post, but it may be a revolutionary moment. Ruth, do you think it is? And if so, the talking may not be all as important as we normally think it is. What do we do?
So
who does what?
I hope it is a revolutionary moment, in the sense that from revolutionary moments come significant change. And significant change is what is required. And I am thinking about our global audience today. And I am grateful and to Bill for helping others to see the passion and the pain, right, that lies behind what is happening in the U.S. But I also want to emphasize my own view that is deeply American, but nevertheless looking broader. There are excluded, there are dominated, they're exploited, there are marginalized groups of people everywhere in the world. And sometimes it's by race, sometimes it's by ethnicity, sometimes it's by gender, sometimes it's by, as Bill was saying, the intersectionality of all of these, right? Wealth. And I hope this is the beginnings of, I don't want to say the beginning of the end, but it is a start of something. I think I am feeling like this may be the start of something in many places of the world. In terms of what needs to change, it's a matter of power, ultimately, I believe. I believe for a long time it's a matter of power. And because it's a matter of power, there is a place for thinking about conversation and dialogue and measured change, but there's also an inevitable need for substantial structural change in the way in which power is experienced by people and distributed societally and globally. And I'll stop there. We can have a conversation about what that looks like, what it looks like. to talk about power.
The thread I'd like to pull on is the table metaphor. Giving a person a seat at a table doesn't accomplish radical change because it's the same table and you just put up another chair maybe. It's probably a smaller chair. That's the way you usually do those things. Is this about a new table? And if so, where does it come from? Eric? And then Bill, please. But Eric first.
I don't know that it's about a new table. I mean, I think about the table we're fighting for in the United States right now, which, back to our theme of democracy, is very much under threat. And, let's bring race more directly into this. We're going through the most consequential election in our lifetimes, and there is an explicit effort on the part of the ruling party to prevent Black people from voting. And you see it, organized structurally in the way that polling places are organized. You see it in a whole set of new laws that take away protections for voting, protections for civil engagement. There is an attempt to seize the table. And so do I think this is a revolutionary moment? I do. The exhilaration of the moment is that I pick up on one cannot help but pick up on and see and be inspired by the energy that Bill referred to, that you see on the streets and the sidewalks and the public plazas in the United States and around the United States and around the world. This is an extraordinary moment, but there is also a countervailing pressure. A strong authoritarian push, a push for repression. And all of us should be feeling uncomfortable at this moment. I support Andreas's idea about creating safe spaces where we can retreat and use, reason to try to work out problems. I'm a scholar and I'm committed to that process. But this is a moment when we are all in the zone of profound discomfort, some days of agony. And that there is death around, there is suffering around, there is dislocation everywhere. It's organized by race. It's defined by class. This is it. I mean, we are in that moment right now. Everything we do has a significance, a set of consequences that's unlike things that have happened before. And so, as much as I want that safe space and value it and try to get there every day, I think right now we are deep in troubled waters. And we need to figure out how to move forward, because the projects and the challenges that Bill has laid out and forced us to deal with, and thank you, Bill, for forcing us to deal with that, they are ours. And this is that moment. And I want the young people to lead us, but if I don't figure out a way to do better, I'm certainly not helping. And I want to find a way to help.
So, Bill, there's a couple thousand people listening to this conversation, and there's a lot of questions coming in asking essentially the same question. What specific and actionable projects might lead to meaningful change on the issue of racial inequality? Should this be global? Reconciliation, reparations? People are asking, not surprisingly, who should do what? What do you think?
Well, first of all, Alan, I apologize for any disrespect for your position on this panel. And Andreas, I applaud the foundation for what you're trying to do. And then I'm going to say to those people asking that question, why in the hell are you asking me? I am not a politician. I am not a scientist. I am an artist doing what an artist does. Who should you be going to? Who's out right now? What's the Black organization within a mile of you? What about your kids? Where are you listening today? What news agencies are you listening to? Where are you going to put your money in the election? So don't put it on me. No, that's not my job. That's your job. Ask yourself the question you're asking me. Now, I understand Eric and Ruth and Andreas, Alan. I think I am among people who want to be allies. That's the term we're using right now. We're trying to be allies. And there is a way in which an ally has to understand Alan, and this is what I meant. Sorry about the wagging of the finger. But Martin Luther King, the letters from the Birmingham jail made it very clear when he says you cannot start a movement until you tell truth. And for me, Eric, the table metaphor is, what is the truth? So let's pull a chair around the table. You cannot have a platform until it's really been excavated where the truth is in that history of oppression, exploitation, and a systematic degradation of whole groups of people, Ruth, that you articulate very well. That's the table we're talking about. So yeah, you do have to remake the table. Who is you? Who is you? Is that me? Is that Washington? Is that Mitch McConnell? Is that Andreas and his foundation? Right? Who is the you? I spend all of my time now worrying about a piece called Deep Blue Sea, and the central idea in Deep Blue Sea is called In Pursuit of the We. In pursuit of the we. We shall overcome, we the people. Because I feel I was fed a bill of goods that was tainted. There was no we. There's never been a we at any time during American history. Has there been a we in the world? Okay, that's the question. So I don't know if I've answered that, and I feel so worn out right now because I gave so much emotion and I'm a little shy, embarrassed. I feel like I would like to leave the conversation and let you folks, you white folks, work it out. It's not my job to be there.
Well, it is your job, apparently, part of the conversation, and that's important. And it really is important to have your voice and the other voices. And this we the people, which is where I had started, it is important because I don't think there has ever been a we in the United States, and I sure as hell know there's no we globally, and I'm positive that's part of the problem. And the question is, what do you do about that? If we get down to tiny little bits and pieces, we will fail. Andreas, over to you.
What Bill T. Jones does, he shows up. He shows up and he makes a spectacle. And he operates from his heart. And then I have people around me who hear what I'm doing and they find ways to finance it and to make policy proposals. That's how I do it. Every person who asks that question, how are you doing it? How are you dealing with the systemic racism? How are you dealing with the inequality? How are you dealing with what COVID has shown us? Don't look to people to tell you the cavalry is not coming. We are the cavalry.
That's right.
If there is one. Ruth, yes, speak,
well, I mean, it's so hard to figure out where to come in. But let me say this. So as individuals, right, regardless of where we're positioned, and many of us are positioned in multiple different ways, right? That's the core notion of intersectionality. We are generally members of multiple groups, some of them in some cases privileged groups, in some cases disadvantaged groups. At least that is my experience, my personal experience. And what I know from that, right, is that that the way I dealt with it, let me just say it this way, is I do it in my scholarship, right? So I write about structural injustice. I study racism. I study patriarchy. I try to give analyses that I hope will be useful to activists, to oppressed peoples. But there's a time at which you feel I'll just speak for myself, I feel like that's not nearly satisfying nor not nearly enough, right? So right now, two things. Resistance, right, has been a rallying call for people who have been disenfranchised and disadvantaged for a long time. How do you resist, right? How do groups resist when there is no cavalry coming, when it is clear, right, that the people in power are not listening closely enough? And resistance itself is worthy of inquiry, right? How should groups resist? And what we're seeing now in the US, and I think, and I will just go back globally, are classically effective, powerful forms of resistance, right? And so the first thing I think about right now is how to support those resistance movements. What does it mean to support those resistance movements? If I can't, my marching days are over, I can't get out and march, but I have to think, what can I do? The other is in this moment, in COVID, right? Writing constantly, working constantly around the racial inequalities and the class inequalities in the way in which the burden of this pandemic is falling down within countries and globally, that has to be center stage. We cannot be talking about COVID response. We cannot be talking about COVID predictions as if all of us are experiencing the pandemic in the same way, because we are not. And there are policy choices to be made, everything from how we're going to allocate the vaccine to whether or not we're going to shut down again, to whether and who gets to wear masks and why it's harder for some people than others to wear masks. All of those things need to be interrogated in this policy moment.
Ruth, the fact of the moment is that those decisions are being made as we speak. This
Correct.
15 to 20 trillion dollars is being thrown at the problems as defined by the throwers of that money as we speak. Those policy choices in the United States, throughout Europe, around the world are being made while we're talking about how important it is to do it differently. I sort of analyze that world for a living, and I don't think that's happening. I don't think anything is different about the response to this crisis so far. Let me pull Eric in, and then we'll come back. Eric, you spend your time worrying about this stuff. Yes, you're a policy guy. Yes, you're an academic policy guy. But am I missing it? Aren't there two trains here? One is actually moving in opposite directions. The world is reinforcing the systems as they exist big time, and others are having a conversation about revolutionary moments. Is there any way to bring those two together? You're muted.
Eric, you're in mute.
Am I back now? Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yeah.
Yes.
What I'm saying is I think the trains are moving in different directions. There's more than two trains, and they're crashing into each other. And that's the definition of an explosive and revolutionary moment. And yes, there is a insurgent group that's growing larger and folding more people in that's very much dedicated to wholesale transformation. I mean, there are things on the table in US politics that could never have been on the table in previous generations. Like there's a legitimate policy conversation about socialism within the Democratic Party, which is surprising to many people. Why are so many people out marching in the streets right now? I think that police murder of African Americans is a trigger, but I think there's a lot of other stuff built into this moment, a lot of other anger and frustration that comes from being home and watching these inequalities unfold. And I think our blocked access to public forums where we can express ourselves and have meaningful connections face to face, that all of that stuff played into the level of outrage and protest that we see in the US and around the world. But Alan, you can bet everything that there are extraordinarily powerful people and institutions that are hell-bent on pushing everyone back down and keeping things in the order that they have been in. Because this order, while not working all that well for the majority of people, works very well for enough people who have enough influence that they're going to fight to the death. And I think that's the moment that we're in right now. I think everything is on the line. And so, yes, I'm a sociologist, and I perceive things moving in different directions. But I perceive them that way, I think, because we are in a rare historical moment, where, to go back to your table, everything is on that table, or maybe there are new tables popping up. And I just don't want to end our conversation today without stressing the urgency of that. And in a way, I guess, this is the appropriate way to launch our, this conference, to launch this year's SNF meeting. I know AI and future is on the, is the thing we're convened around. But part of the messiness and explosiveness of this moment is that we can no longer contain these areas now. We can no longer hold these things in. There is something happening that is essential to who we are and where we're going. And we have no choice but to name it and fight over it. And I think we're going to be in this space for a while.
But I think
Andreas, I want, just let me frame what, in addition to what you're going to respond to Eric. You said in your little clip that philanthropy can't replace government. Maybe in this moment there's a different need for what philanthropy can do. Maybe it is about trying to, how do you engage in this world that's being described? What can you do differently?
No, I don't.
Not you, but philanthropy in general. It's Ford, it's all those guys.
Number one, I'm a big believer that philanthropy it plays a small part and should play a small part for many reasons. That can be another conference topic. It does play a small role. It should play a small role. It's more about facilitating opportunities for the public and the private to work together. I really believe that philanthropy can be a small facilitator into that. What I wanted to, so there's not a lot that we can do, and we have to be careful. I've learned in my life that it's dangerous to underestimate. It's very dangerous to overestimate. And philanthropy should not be overestimated, both because it cannot do much in the big relative picture, and number two, it shouldn't be there to do much. This is public policy, this is governments, this is like it's a social issue. But Eric, to your point about humanity and AI, because we have spoken a lot about that, and I think both in very different ways, but both humanity, analyzing what humanity is and the lack of humanity in today's life in many respects, and the emergence of AI, which is again another topic. But together, these two things are going to be around us. And the thing is, how do we make them become part of the solution in a lot of the problems that we have today? So it's very vague, and I can't express it much better, but I think talking about humanity, talking about AI, talking about how they work together, they can, in my view, work and become part of the solution in many issues that we are facing today as a global human society. We are starting to lose the human aspect of humanity. And it may sound crazy what I'm saying, but it's starting. And this is happening at the same time when AI is becoming stronger and stronger. And I don't think we have too much time to deal with this thing. Before we know it, AI will take us over. And somebody said a year ago, humanity is not ready for AI. And it's not only that we're not ready for AI, but all the negative. So I think we have a small window where we can, as humans, try to engage and try to find ways to work with and use them as tools for solutions. If we don't, we're going to be overwhelmed. And then you're talking about, which we have another panel on it, about the ethics. And my point there is, still there are people behind AI. In maybe a few decades, there might not even be people. So the ethics of AI will be developed by the ethics of the people who are leading us into the AI. And this is a very dangerous path. We think we have problems, my God. So I think this whole aspect of humanity and AI, how they interplay, how we have to focus on them, not only as being part of the solution, but making sure we're not taken over, because then we're going to be taken over as a human race. And I know it may sound crazy, and the AI people will tell me you know nothing about technology and this and that, but it's true. The ethics of AI are going to be developed by the ethics of the people who have control of the AI and the whole technology. That's another issue, but it's there, so we have to engage. So I think it can be part of the solution into this.
Andreas, I agree with you. I just want to say we know that there's not much democracy or diversity in the upper offices of tech firms in Silicon Valley. And it's notable how much critical attention people in Ruth's world and my world, the university world, have paid to the ways in which new algorithms that come from AI discriminate. And what an amazing thing that one of the first things we've seen dropped since the protest started is the use of facial recognition software by a small number of companies who said, we need to suspend this because we see how much damage we're doing. But clearly, we need to diversify and democratize this debate, and I'm glad you're having this debate.
Yeah.
Was it because they saw the damage, or they got afraid that we are on to them? That's another discussion. But we are be on to them.
Motivation aside,
I love technology. For any tech guys, I love technology. But what I'm saying is we can't let them take us into this thing without us being part of it. So again, to my point about a safe space, and I know this word safe space can be beset up, but I mean, let's get together and talk about them. We all come from different backgrounds with different ideas. Let's try, because I do think that I go back to in good faith and with good intentions, I think we would all be surprised how many things unite us and how many things can unite us into finding solutions. I really believe that. And I think the strongest population in that are the youth, the young people who have not been tainted by us or by life. But things happen fast, and they will not be young for a long time. So everything is coming into a perfect storm. But at the same time, we can turn it around, and I do think we can turn it around. And we need to build.
In my ear.
Hold on. May I please? Let's not talk on
because
this.
we're about to be shut off.
Let's not talk about turning around yet. Let's not talk about turning around.
Agree.
Let's push the mother forward. Push the mother forward. You see this?
Agreed.
You see this?
Agreed.
You know that?
Agreed.
You know what that is, right? You see it this
Agreed.
way, right? I want this. I'm going to go out right now singing, because I want the people watching to hear where I'm at. Ruth, take a position. Eric, take a position. Andreas, take a position. Now is the time to be messy. And let's think about what Fannie Lou Hamer said in those churches during the civil rights struggle, when it would be surrounded by the state troopers and their dogs. And she would tell people, come on, children, start singing, because it's harder for them to kill you when you're singing. So I'm going to sing as I go out, and then I'm going to say goodbye to the conversation. And this is the story. Now imagine the picture of poor, tired people who have been out in the fucking cotton fields since in the morning, all day. And now it is dark, and they are going home in a group, and they see the light, and they start singing, walk, walk, don't you get weary, walk, walk, don't you get weary, walk, walk. That's my stake in the moment right now. Build the table, Eric. Get it down in the halls of Congress and in the academia, Ruth. Andres, fund it, but get your heart behind it. Something is wrong. Don't talk about placating right now. Don't talk about it. Demonstrate what you're going to live. Ruth, how is your white privilege going? You say you don't know what to do with the people right around you. Bill T. Jones, how is your misogyny and anti-trans feelings going on? How does it look in the relationships around you? Make it super personal. Walk, walk. Thank you very much, and I'm out of here, okay?
Thank you,
as are we all. Thank you very much. Next year in Athens.
Thank you. Thank you, Eric. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Ruth.